To the Washington Post, I respect you. I've had a very good relationship with you for a long period of time, but your story was unfair to my family.
We'll go now to the Senate floor. They have just gavelled back into session. Senators will continue debate on a bill to continue Food and Drug Administration fees on prescription drug reviews and approval. This is live Senate coverage on C-SPAN 2.
We can vote on this sometime later this afternoon. Mr. President, we just considered this bill in the Senate a few weeks ago, passed it 96-1. Following the conference with the House passed the bill unanimously last week. Today, I trust that we will finish the job. Mr. President, I am genuinely proud of this legislation. It will ensure that the FDA has the resources to speed market access to drugs and devices while continuing to ensure patient safety. For the first time, it will make new resources available to allow the FDA to clear its backlog of applications for generic drugs, which will help ensure that patients have access to less expensive medications. It will make sure that the FDA has the funds to prevent there ever being a backlog in applications for biosimilars. These resources are vital to FDA's ability to do its job, to the medical products industry's ability to make these products, and most importantly, to patients who need both access to drug and devices and assurances that they are indeed safe. This legislation has benefited from input from a diverse range of interested parties, senators on both sides of the aisle here, our colleagues in the House, industry stakeholders, consumer groups, and patient groups. Well over a year ago, parties started bringing policy ideas to the table. We worked together in bipartisan working groups to reach consensus on these policy measures. And where we could not achieve consensus, we didn't allow those differences to distract us from the critically important goal of producing a bill that could be broadly supported. As a result of this bipartisan process, we have a bill that advances our shared goals: patient safety, patient access, a well-functioning FDA, and strong and viable American businesses. We streamlined the device approval process while also enhancing patient protections. We modernized FDA's authority to ensure that drugs and drug ingredients coming to the U.S. from overseas are safe, and to ensure that our domestic companies compete on a level playing field with foreign ones. We addressed the critical problem of drug shortages. We helped spur innovation and incentivize drug development for life-threatening conditions. We reauthorized and improved the incentives for studying drugs in children. Finally, we increased accountability and transparency at FDA. So the bill strikes a balance. It will help keep our regulatory system in pace to adapt to technological and scientific advances. It will create the conditions to foster innovative advances in medical technologies. And again, it will do all of this without losing sight of the most important function of the FDA: ensuring patient safety. So it's been a long road leading up to this moment. As I said, we've been working on this bill for well over a year and 3 or 4 months with the help of senators on and off the committee. And again, I want to thank my colleague, a ranking member of the Help Committee, Senator Enzi, for all of his diligent and hard work on this, and that of his staff for helping to bring all the different parties together and to make sure that we had a consensus bill that really responded to all of those inputs. So we've had a great collaboration. I think we have an excellent bill. And again, I'm hopeful that we can have our comments and discussion this afternoon, but I urge all my colleagues to vote today to pass the FDA Safety and Innovation Act. It is critically important to the agency, to the industry, to the patients that we get this done. And this would be the final step, I would say. As I said, the House passed it unanimously. If we pass it today, it can go to the President for his signature as soon as we pass it this afternoon. And with that, I would yield to whatever time you may consume to, before I do that, just say, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Sergio Perez, Peter Bouts, Bill McConaughey, and Sean O'Connor of my staff be granted 4 privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objections, ordered.
And, Mr. President, with that, I would yield whatever time you may consume, to my good friend and colleague and the ranking member, Senator Enzi.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
I thank the chairman of the committee, and I thank him for his kind words, but I thank him for his leadership on this issue. We've had a great teamwork effort, both between the senators and between the staff. And this isn't something that just came together a couple of weeks ago. This is something that's been worked on for about a year and a half, and pretty constant meetings on Fridays of all of the interested groups and then stakeholders. And it takes a tremendous amount of work to put something like this together and have it be in a bipartisan way like this. And it's largely because it came to committee. And in committee, we took a look at all of the amendments that were suggested, and we got the people together that had very similar amendments, and they usually were able to work out something to satisfy everybody in that instance, and we came up with a bill. And as Senator Harkin mentioned, passed 96-1 here. And any time that we get something to pass, it is kind of a landmark thing. But when you get something that bipartisan, it's even more landmark. Well, we've been trying to get this bill wrapped up before the Supreme Court decision came out on health care. And the reason we've been trying to do that is who knows what it's going to say or what kind of ideas people will come up with when that happens. From both sides of the aisle, you know, this is a group of 100 idea generators, and so we wanted this cleared up by that time, and we're on a path to get that done right now, and a path that will keep the people employed that are taking a look at new drugs and devices and generics and biosimilars, and continue to get those on the market so that people will have the latest innovations. And of course, one of the things that we included in the bill was some use of foreign clinical trials if they were approved by the FDA. And that should even speed up the process. Of course, when you go to conference, there are a lot of things that people want to have, you know, that they brought up as amendments, and it's very critical in the bill. And you get some of them and you don't get others. I know that Senator Alexander played a huge role in this, and he had 7 items in the bill, and we got 6 of them. Senator Burr had 12 items in the bill, and we got 11 of them. And I've got to mention, of course, that one that we did not get is a particularly important but particularly difficult issue that's going to take more time to get it worked out. But it's one that deals with drug distribution security, and that's something we cannot avoid. We have to do. But it's going to take longer to work that out and deserves some extra time and some more understanding on both sides of the aisle on that one and in a number of different states. And it doesn't just involve the Senate. It doesn't just involve the drug companies. It also involves the whole chain that these things have to go through, including the local pharmacists who we don't want to overload with work, and the people who have to transport these drugs, who we don't want to overload with work or make it extremely complicated when they cross different state lines to have to do different kinds of reporting. Senator Isaacson had 4 amendments in there, and we were able to get 3 of them. Senator Paul had 2, and we got 1. Senator Hatch had 6, and we got all of them. Senator McCain had 2, and we got 1. Senator Roberts had 2, and we got both of those. Senator Murkowski had 2, and we got both of those. Senator Kirk had 2, and we got 1 of those. Senator Grassley had 2, and we got 1 of those. And Senator Portman had 2, and we got both of those. And Senator Coburn had 2, and we got 1 of those. Senator Corker had 2, and we got both of those. So there are a lot of the things that we did on the Senate side that became possible on the House side, and of course there are a number of things that they did on the House side that we couldn't agree with on this side either. But we did reach agreement, and we reached it in pretty much record time, and we now have a bill that can go ahead and be passed and go to the President for signature and assure that the level of safety that we have in our drugs not only continues but improves, and that drugs can get on the market faster than they have before by streamlining the process, and also making sure that there are better foreign inspections so that the ingredients that grow into drugs don't cause problems. So this legislation reauthorizes the Food and Drug Administration's user fee programs and it ensures that the Americans get better access to safe, innovative medicines and medical devices. It'll make significant changes that will improve the FDA's review and approval of new drugs and devices. Unfortunately, FDA's current process for reviewing and approving medical devices too often creates delay and unpredictability. This, in turn, threatens patient access to the best possible treatments for their conditions. In some cases, this has forced American patients to travel overseas to obtain access to life-saving new devices that FDA has not approved in the United States. The bill goes a long ways towards solving these problems and makes the most significant changes to the law governing FDA's review of devices in decades. This bill will speed the approval of devices by reducing the red tape associated with the, quote, least burdensome, unquote, standard that FDA uses to approve such devices. The bill will also make it easier for FDA to approve devices for patients with rare diseases who might not otherwise be able to have their conditions treated most effectively. It will also enable FDA to expedite safety determinations, to resolve appeals, and to improve their post-approval surveillance activities to detect problems as they occur. It's not good enough just to get it to approved. We want them watched after they're approved, and this will do it. The bill also contains important reforms to foster drug innovation and patient access to new therapies. It modernizes the accelerated approval pathway for drugs to reflect advancements in science over the past 20 years. And it formalizes a new process to expedite the development and approval of breakthrough therapies. These changes are particularly important for patients with rare diseases where there are no therapies available, and it's not feasible or ethical to require large conventional clinical trials. Nobody wants to be the one that's a test case when there might be something that really would work for them, and there aren't the size of the populations to be able to do the conventional clinical trial anyway. The patient community strongly supports these improvements because these will save lives. The bill also contains important reforms that will help mitigate the problems associated with drug shortages. It will require better coordination within FDA as well as the other federal agencies like the DEA. It will also allow FDA to move faster to take actions to address shortages through expedited reviews and approvals. The bill follows what I call the 80% rule. When we focus on the 80% of the issues that we can reach agreement on, rather than focusing exclusively on the parts, the issues that we can never resolve, we can achieve amazing results. Over a year ago, staff began to work on identifying the 80%. A group of staff from Republican and Democratic offices on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee began a series of standing meetings and proceeded to meet every week for several months. They met with stakeholders and discussed policy solutions that each member thought would solve the problem. After much discussion of the benefits, costs, and possible unintended consequences, members agreed on a list of policy concepts. If there was not a consensus on a particular policy, it wasn't included. This is the 80% rule in action. As this process has progressed, my staff also met with the Republican staff on the Help Committee for at least 2 hours every week to keep them informed and seek their input. I also personally met with the members of the committee before markup to ensure that I understood their priorities. This bill reflects the work of every member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. All of them have at least one provision included in this legislation. Many members off the committee worked with us to find consensus measures that address their priorities as well. As I mentioned, not everyone got everything they wanted. We did, however, find the 80% of each solution that we could all agree would help solve the problem, and the bill passed the committee by a voice vote. This legislation could be a model for how the process can and should work, regardless of the political environment. We followed this model as we transitioned from the committee process to the Senate floor. We worked with members who filed amendments in committee to address some of the concerns in the manager's amendment. We also worked with members who filed amendments on the Senate floor. We did the same thing in our discussions with the House. You can see that the results are very positive. We preserved and improved policies to foster drug innovation and patient access and to promote accountability and transparency at the FDA. We also made significant improvements to the Senate's medical device reforms for startup and emerging growth companies and with respect to the 510K process. Now, we'd like to thank Senator Harkin for his tireless effort on this bill. I know that he spent countless hours and attended dozens of meetings working with senators and stakeholders and advocates to address their concerns. This bill would not have had such broad bipartisan support without all of his work. Senator Harkin's staff has also worked tirelessly on this bipartisan bill. Their knowledge, their professionalism, their graciousness were instrumental in addressing all of the issues in this bill. They worked many late evenings, they worked through weekends, they worked through countless working group discussions to be able to get the bill where it is today. And specifically, I want to recognize Elizabeth Youngman, Bill McConaughey, Kathleen Laird, Kate Wise for all their work. I want to thank Pam Smith, Senator Harkin's staff director, for her leadership in getting this bill to the finish line. I especially want to recognize Janelle Krishnamurthy, whose organizational and diplomatic skills helped us resolve the most difficult challenges and made sure that the priorities of all the members of the committee are reflected in the bill. I'd also like to thank the staffs of the Legislative Council, the Congressional Budget Office, and the Food and Drug Administration for all of their technical assistance. Again, there were people in those groups that had to work through the weekends as we were finishing up. And finally, I'd like to thank my staff, Keith Flanagan, Melissa Pfaff, Grace Stuntz, Katie Spangler, Rob Walton, and my Health Policy Director, Chuck Clapton. And I'd be really remiss if I didn't thank my staff director, Frank Macchiarola, for his work on this bill, especially as this bill progressed from the Help Committee, the Senate floor, and discussions with the House. My staff's been working around the clock for many days and for weeks and for months, and I sincerely appreciate their dedication to getting this bill passed and for helping to work with the 80% rule. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill that makes important changes to the FDA, and I ask them to support this process that expedites getting the conference done. We will have a real and meaningful impact on millions of American patients. I thank the chair and yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I'd like to start off by thanking the chair and the ranking member for the great work that they have accomplished with what has always been a very delicate piece of legislation. Their staffs have been tireless on both sides at trying to work out differences, and we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for their commitment to this legislation. Let me say to the chair and the ranking member, I plan to go on for some time. If I were you, I would take the opportunity to leave for a while, because I will go for an hour or two or maybe three. And it's not all going to pertain specifically to this legislation. But I've got a lot to say, because I've heard some of the opening statements, and I've heard statements like our goal was to finish before the Supreme Court. I got a question. Why? Why did a crucial piece of legislation that affects so many Americans and ultimately so many patients around the world, why did it have to be done before the Supreme Court? I'm not sure that anybody can give an answer, but somebody started that as a goal, and it just sort of was adopted. And I heard that the legislation was accomplished at record speed. I don't see that as something to herald. I mean, speed is indicative of something that we rushed our way through. And I know, on behalf of the chairman's staff and the ranking member's staff, they've been working on this a long time. So has my staff. But from a standpoint of when we marked up the legislation, we came to the floor, how fast we went through the floor, we did it because there was an understanding that we were going to try to hold the Senate product together. Now, I don't want to take issue with the numbers. I had 2 amendments that were dropped in conference, so I'm not sure how I had 12 and got 11. But that's irregardless. The question that we're here to do, the purpose of this legislation, is that this is supposed to drive innovation in America and bring life-saving drugs, devices, and biologics to patients here in America first, but around the country, around the world. And that's the goal behind this legislation. And I've got to take issue with my ranking member. I don't think the 80% rule applies to health care. I can't look at a patient and say, well, if we can get 80% of the right policy, I'm going to feel good. If I'm in the 20% that's left out, I'm going to be really pissed off. One of the reasons that our health care costs are so high today is that we've been able to innovate as a country to where we maintain disease extremely well. But we're right on the cusp of being able to cure things like breast cancer, diabetes. It's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be fast. You're not going to find it in the 80% category. You're going to find it in the 20% category. It's going to take a while. It's going to take people invest in capital and companies that are committed to their shareholders that they're not going to have the returns because they're investing on something important, and that's the long-term future of this country and our country's health. That's what I see in a 5-year PDUFA bill. You know, this is not a one-year reauthorization of something. And granted, this is not a piece of legislation that this committee drafted from scratch. It's important that everybody understands that this legislation are the negotiations between drugs, devices, biologics, generics industry with the Food and Drug Administration. There's not a member of Congress and no staff of Congress in the room as they negotiate what fees they're going to pay to the FDA to actually process their applications. So the focus of this committee was to look at what happened in the negotiations and try to figure out how could we make this bill better? How could we assure ourselves that there was a level of transparency that we could understand that the negotiations they had entered into, in fact, benefited American patients? If this doesn't benefit the health care cost and the health care of Americans, then we've missed the mark. So the whole objective is to put America in a better position after the passage of this bill. Now, Mr. President, I'll be boring because some of what I'm going to talk about, a lot of people in this institution know. But I'm not sure that the American people understand the background that's here. The Food and Drug Administration is responsible for assuring the safety and the efficacy and the security of human and animal medical products. One element of FDA's statutory mission is to promote the public health, and the FDA accomplishes this mission in part by timely approving life-saving, life-enhancing innovations that make medicine safer, more effective, and in many cases, more affordable. FDA's broad regulatory authority crosses a range of products and has resulted in the agency overseeing products that amount for 25 cents of every dollar of the U.S. economy. Let me say that again. The FDA regulation extends to 25 cents of every dollar spent in the U.S. economy. Therefore, the FDA's review and decision process does not only impact our nation's patients and innovators, their work has a significant impact on many sectors of our nation's economy. As consumers and patients, the American people have serious interest in ensuring that the FDA is accountable, transparent, efficient, and making sound decisions in a timely fashion as possible. You see, that's why I'm on the floor today. If the goal is to have transparent, efficient, sound decisions in a timely fashion, you don't rush through it. You make sure that there's a matrix in place, not one that was designed by the agency, and not one that was designed by the industry, but one that's designed by the body that's responsible to do oversight over federal agencies, the Congress of the United States, the Help Committee. It's our job That's why concerns about timeliness and predictability of FDA's regulatory process must be taken seriously, and they must be addressed. Unfortunately, too often Congress is guilty of not paying close enough attention to how well things are working or not working. At the FDA, on behalf of patients, the very people for whom the most is at stake. Every 5 years, drug and device industries negotiate their user fees that are then sent to Congress with the expectation that we will quickly act upon to ensure the continuity at the agency. And let me assure you, this year is no exception. They dropped these agreements on Congress's lap and said, would you pass these as quickly as you can with no changes? And to their credit, the chair and the ranking member said no. Congress has a role to play, and staffs had tremendous input at what the final product was. Unfortunately, rushing the bills through the House and the Senate has resulted in bipartisan track and trace provisions not being included in the bill we have before us today. Now, as the ranking member said, I'm very disappointed that these important bipartisan provisions were sacrificed at the expense of speed. I understand the difficulty of the lift. I acknowledge that to my colleagues and to their staff. But I also question how hard we really tried on an issue that we knew going in was tough. There's no such thing as spending too much time when it comes to getting something as important as drug distribution security right. And I want to assure all my colleagues that my friend from Colorado, Senator Bennett, and I will continue to work together to get these important provisions done. And I might add, I've had the commitment from the chair and the ranking member to work with us on other legislation to try to address this. But let me say today, it won't be any easier then than it was right now. It may be tougher then because this was a vehicle that had to go. Therefore, people would have swallowed a lot more than's in this bill. As my colleagues know, FDA and industry tell us not to make any changes because it would, and I quote, open up the agreement. Think about that. The industry and the FDA told Congress, don't put anything else in here because we would consider that as opening up our agreement. When did Congress become so irrelevant that a federal agency would suggest that we not get involved? Yet it requires our passage for this to go into statute. So I've explained before, Congress is told to tiptoe around the agreements, and we focus our efforts on the belt and suspenders policies to complement the agreement. This does not make for the most consistent and deliberative process in considering how Congress can work with FDA and industry to strengthen and improve FDA's drug and device work on behalf of our nation's patients. But this is the process that members have to work within, which is why it's so important to assure that the right policy riders, including transparency and accountability, are included in the final package. Now, one thing that has been made quite clear over the past few years is the importance of FDA reporting on the right matrix. I can predict with some confidence, since this is a 5-year bill, we will be here 5 years from now. And hopefully there will be at least one member of the Senate that steps up and says, how did the FDA hold up against what they said they were going to do in the agreements? Well, that's at the heart of transparency and accountability. If we haven't got a matrix established that everybody understands here's where we are and here's where we've promised we're going to get to, then how in the world 5 years from now do we measure this? How do we know then that if you raise the user fees, that it's justified, that the beneficiary of it is the American patient? I'm going to say something that's candidly obvious to everybody listening. When drug companies, device companies, biologic companies, generic companies pay more money to get their application approved, who pays for it? The consumers. The people who buy the drugs, use the devices, buy the generics. This is the first time we've ever had a user fee for generic pharmaceuticals. Generics were called that because generics were created after the patent life expired so that we could bring low-cost products to the market. And now what are we doing? We're creating a generic user fees, which is going to raise generic cost price for the American people. It may alter whether, in fact, it's cheaper to go in and pay for your generic prescription or whether it's cheaper to let your copayment do it on your insurance card. That's the reality of what we're dealing with, and I'm not suggesting that it's bad. But why would you rush through it without understanding what the impact is? That's where we are today. Now, reporting only on the negotiated user fees performance goals agreed by the industry and the FDA has not provided a complete picture of how well the FDA is working to fulfill its mission on behalf of patients. The bottom line is what gets measured gets done. So it's got to be measured. In the Wall Street Journal op-ed earlier this year, former FDA Commissioner Andy von Eschenbach highlighted what's at stake if Congress does not get the user fee reauthorization package right and fix the underlying problems at the FDA. He writes, and I quote, "The stakes couldn't be higher for our health." The stakes couldn't be higher for our health. The U.S. biomedical industry is one of the crown jewels of the American economy. It employs 1.2 million people directly and over 5 million throughout its supply chain, with a total output of $519 billion in 2009. Many of the firms are among the world's most innovative. From 2001 to 2010, the 2011 Millikan Institute report showed U.S. companies produced nearly 60% of the world's new medicine. U.S. companies produced nearly 60% of the world's new medicines, up from 42% the previous decade. But U.S. firms won't continue to lead unless the FDA retains its role as the world's gold standard for evaluating new medical products. Many people establish the gold standard as being the hurdle that you have to pass to be approved. I would tell you that the gold standard is also how difficult is the process you have to go through, and will the capital be there to finance the research and development so that approval is something that you see as light at the end of the tunnel. These all have to be weighed in the policies that you put in place, and I would tell you that we've come up somewhat short. Last year, the National Venture Capital Association released a report that underscores America's risk of losing its standing as the world leader in medical innovation. Their survey clearly showed that the FDA's regulatory challenges, the lack of regulatory certainty, the day-to-day unpredictability, unnecessary delays are stifling investment in the development of life-saving drugs and devices. Instead of deterring investment and innovation in life-saving treatments in areas such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer, we should accelerate it. Instead of deterring that capital to come in, we should be finding policies to accelerate that capital to chase cures in heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Working with America's innovators on behalf of patients depending on the next breakthrough drug or device. Our nation's health care system is unsustainable. We all agree. We must lower health care costs in America. Predictable regulatory pathways that facilitate innovative medical products reaching patients in a timely manner as possible is key for lowering our health care costs. This survey is another serious call for the need to restore regulatory certainty and predictability at the FDA. But comb through this bill. The two amendments that were voted and accepted in the Senate markup of the bill were dropped, discarded. because somebody was too concerned with requiring too many reports. There's a reason you get granular with what you put in legislation and, more importantly, what you require an agency to produce. Predictable regulatory pathways that facilitate innovative medical products reaching patients in a timely manner will lower our health care costs. It's clear that the FDA's global leadership in innovation is at risk. A 2011 report by the California Healthcare Institute and the Boston Consulting Group highlighted this point. The report found that in recent years, the environment for medical innovation has deteriorated, and the most critical factor has been the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Let me repeat that. The report found the environment for medical innovation has deteriorated, and the most critical factor has been the Food and Drug Administration. The report states, and I quote, "For the agency's policies and activities exemplify President Obama's critique of a regulatory system whose rules have gotten out of balance, placing unreasonable burdens on business, burdens that have stifled innovation and have had a chilling effect on growth and jobs." Now all of a sudden we're talking about a piece of legislation that we rushed through the process because we wanted to beat the Supreme Court rule on decision on Thursday. We did it at an accelerated pace, faster than we've ever done through the United States Senate. And we realized this legislation affects the economy and jobs. It's not just about health care. It's not just about patients. It's about jobs. Dr. David Gallagher, President and CEO of the California Healthcare Institute, raises a clear alarm in his report that we should all heed. He concludes, and I quote, "The result of the uneven performance of the agency has been to increase the risk associated with regulation, dampening investment in companies whose products face FDA regulation. Meanwhile, as global competition in high-tech industries is intensified, other nations have adapted their regulatory systems to outcompete the FDA. The flight of medical technology products launches to European Union countries should be a serious cause of concern for policymakers and patient advocates alike." What's that mean in layman's terms? We're losing them here, and the EU is attracting them there. Why? Because their policies are easier to understand. It's not that their threshold for safety and efficacy is any lower, but they carry on an honest partnership with the applicants. And most would tell you dealing with the FDA is like inviting your worst relative to spend a week with you in your house. Exporting life-saving innovation overseas and the jobs that come with it won't help patients or our economy here at home. It erodes our nation's standing as the global leader in medical innovation and results in America's patients having to wait longer for life-saving therapies or jeopardizing their access to them at all. You know, I'm not sure in America we ever thought that we would go to another country where they had approved a new therapy that we couldn't get in the United States. But I'd be willing to bet that every family in America knows somebody that's gone outside the country to get some type of treatment or some type of dosage of something that we haven't approved here. And one might think that they're not safe or effective. The likelihood is that those products have never even applied for FDA approval. Why? Because the process has become so unpredictable and so expensive that a company has to justify the potential sales of a product to meet the billion-dollar cost just to get through the FDA application process. Exporting life-saving innovation overseas and the jobs that come with it won't help our patients, and it won't help the economy. It erodes our nation's standing as a global leader in medical innovation and results in America's patients having to wait longer. Just said it. The FDA is supported by both user fees and taxpayer dollars, so Congress has a critical oversight role in ensuring that FDA is meeting its requirements under the law. Moreover, as elected representatives of the American people, Congress institutionally has a duty to ensure that the FDA is broadly fulfilling its statutory mission in promoting the public health through its review regulation on a range of medical products. The reauthorization of the drug and device user fees agreements is an important opportunity for Congress to ensure that the FDA is fulfilling its mission. Why would we in any way water down the accountability and transparency if, in fact, we are the ones to ensure FDA fulfilling its mission? But closely examining these issues once every 5 years is not going to help address the underlying problems at the FDA that we all know must be fixed. The only way that's going to happen is with the FDA, Congress, patients, innovators, consistently working together with the right data points. The bottom line is you don't know what you don't measure. If you don't know it, how can you ensure that it's right? Another report by the California Healthcare Institute and the Boston Consulting Group in 2012 underscores the importance of reliable data at the FDA and how FDA performance is a function of management. The report finds that there would be great value in regularly gathering and analyzing the best possible data and updating performance metrics during this PDUFA cycle in order to track performance consistently and longitudinally with the goal of the most accurate possible measures of agency performance. You sense the trend here that every outside group, not industry, not FDA, not Congress, every outside evaluation of the user fee agreement is basically saying, hey, Congress, don't miss this opportunity. If you want to track the performance, then you've got to set up the matrix and collect the data. Why in the world would we drop from the bill the transparency and accountability provisions that get the granular data that we need to make this assessment? I guess we'll never know. Congressional oversight can help highlight the process that are working well at the FDA, as well as reveal areas where the FDA needs to make improvements to ensure timely and predictable regulatory decisions on behalf of America's patients. Recent GAO reports over the past year have underscored these points and why that right matrix must be reported to paint a full and complete picture. Now, all of a sudden, we've got the General Accounting Office, the GAO. They're saying the same thing that all these third parties have said. Why? Because they're the ones that we turn to when we want to ask them to do an evaluation of the FDA. And they're telling Congress, hey, don't miss this opportunity. Get this stuff in there. You actually can get the data that we can't get because it's not in the statute. Every 5 years when we pass the final user fee package, FDA's authority and responsibilities grow. Think about that. More employees, higher cost. Seems like things would be getting better. But without the matrix, without the accountability, without transparency, we don't know. This bill is no exception. FDA is going to get an unprecedented level of user fees and more new authority. Billions in user fee dollars. With this unprecedented level of user fees, there must be unprecedented transparency, oversight, and accountability. It does not exist. Let me be clear. There are good provisions in this bill that should help to improve transparency, accountability, and regulatory certainty. However, throughout the committee's work on various issues, I repeatedly raised the point that if we did not fix the underlying issues at the FDA, the new responsibilities and expectations we are going to create with this bill would not achieve the desired outcome. So quite simply, that's why I'm disappointed that some key transparency, accountability provisions included in the Senate bill did not survive the final bill. While key GAO reporting provisions may have been removed from the final bill, I want to take this opportunity to inform my colleagues and the FDA that I personally intend in pursuing this oversight analysis outside of this bill. Just because it's not in this bill doesn't mean I'm going to go away. What this has done is speed has trumped policy. The attempt to speed through this bill, the attempt to get it done before the Supreme Court announces its decision on Obamacare. I have yet to have anybody explain to me why we're benefited by moving this before the Supreme Court rules. If somebody's got a concern that there's something in this bill that might be affected by what the Supreme Court ruling is, would we not be smart to delay this until after the ruling to see if there's some adverse reaction to what we've done? If I thought there was any reason to do that, I'd be on the Senate floor pleading with my colleagues today. But the truth is there's nothing that will come out in the Supreme Court decision that will affect the user fee relationship between drugs, devices, biologics, and generics and the Food and Drug Administration. But somebody wanted to finish it, and they set that as the goal that everybody could see. Because of the hard work of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the final bill includes new incentives intended to help spur the next generation of life-saving antibiotics. This is a good thing, and my colleagues should be commended for their bipartisan work on this important issue. Unfortunately, the requirement for the FDA to submit a strategy and implementation plan that would have helped to ensure greater regulatory certainty and predictability regarding FDA's work with antibiotics was not included in the final bill. Yet we've all watched on TV as a young lady who was attacked with a virus that's eaten her hands and her feet, an infection. What does she need? She needs a breakthrough in antibiotic therapy. This was a real opportunity for us to send a message out there that not only are we committed to do it, we're committed to set up a regulatory structure that allows it to happen. Carefully drafted GAO reporting requirements intended to help FDA and Congress identify progress against regulatory challenges in this space has also fallen away. This had nothing to do with Richard Burr or Michael Bennett. This was the General Accounting Office. Unfortunately, the reporting requirements that remain is nearly as robust as the language passed by the Senate earlier this year. These requirements were intended to help identify and root out the underlying regulatory challenges in this space to ensure that the incentives included in the final bill are as meaningful as possible and ultimately do achieve the goal of the next generation of novel antibiotics reaching patients. I can't think of anything more important than for us to make sure. I know the President comes from a state where devices are a key part of the economy. Another reporting requirement that fell away is one that my colleagues have heard me talk about a lot over the past year. The medical device user fee agreement includes reporting on the total time to decision in calendar days, not FDA days. You know, this sounds a little bit like Disney World. What in the heck are FDA days? I know what calendar days are. Tomorrow's going to be one number higher than today, and yesterday was one number lower, and every 28 to 31 days we switch and it becomes a new month and we start counting over again. Not at the FDA. And that's why it was important that calendar days be substituted for what we call FDA days at the FDA. Patients don't care about FDA days. Patients care about how long it takes in calendar days for safe and effective products to reach them. My colleagues may recall that last year, the final agricultural appropriations bill included a requirement for FDA to report on calendar days, because knowing the average number of calendar days it's taking for FDA to approve therapies to reach patients is important for assuring that we see a full picture of how well FDA is working in a metrics that the American people understood. Last year, when the Senate considered the issue of counting calendar days for medical products, Dr. Paul Howard, a senior fellow and the director of the Manhattan Institute Center for Medical Progress, described the importance of counting calendar days. He wrote, and I quote, "The PDUFA clock stops when the FDA requests more information from sponsors. So repeated requests for more information from the FDA can significantly draw out the time before a product reaches the market. Even if the agency completes its review within the specified PDUFA time frame, knowing actual calendar days that elapse from between the time that a sponsor submits an application to the time it's approved should give Congress some sense of how efficient the review process is. If the FDA is repeatedly asking for more information and lots of time, it's added to the approval process. It has important implications for patients who wait longer for new therapies and investors who may perceive the regulatory process is arbitrary and time-consuming," unquote. Here again, another independent analysis of what should be important to the American health care system, and an assessment that calendar days are absolutely vital to Congress's ability to understand how long does it really take at the FDA, and we're not even the person trying to finance the breakthrough. I appreciate that the final bill will now require more granular reporting with respect to the prescription drug user fee agreement, which is a good thing. But I'm baffled that a reporting requirement Congress has supported in the past and which was included for generic drugs was not included in the final bill. Talking about calendar days. How in the world could calendar days be important enough to put in the generic bill part and dropped from everything else? Why? Because FDA didn't want it. FDA's gotten used to that little stopwatch that they've got. And when they ask you for a little more information, they reset it. So they get to start again. My dear colleague, Tom Coburn, and I both are disappointed that a provision offered by him, and which I supported, was removed from the final bill. You know, I've talked about a number of things removed from the final bill. I'm not sure how the ranking member gave me a number at the beginning that I had interest in 12 things and I had 11 accepted. I can't count as I'm going through my presentation, but I think I'm on 3 or 4 that have been dropped. The medical device user fee agreement includes the requirement for an independent assessment of FDA's management of devices. Unfortunately, the assessment included in the prescription drug user fee agreement and the final bill will look at only 1/3 of the FDA's work with drugs. Let me say that again. The medical device user fee agreement includes the requirement for an individual assessment of FDA's management of devices. Unfortunately, the assessment included in the prescription drug fee agreement and final bill will look at only 1/3 of the FDA's work for drugs. Calendar days apply in one section. Generic drugs don't apply in devices, drugs, biologics. Now all of a sudden we've got an independent assessment of FDA's management of the devices industry where we're only applying that to 1/3 of the area of drug evaluation and not to generics and not to biologics. Senator Coburn's provision, which was first introduced in a bill that Senator Coburn and I introduced, the Patients FDA Act, would have ensured an independent assessment of all FDA's drug work. Upon introduction of the Patients FDA Act, Dr. Paul Howard wrote that this provision, and I quote, "perhaps the most important provision, because the outcome of that review may or may not be welcomed by the FDA, but it will force Congress to pay attention and highlight the FDA's importance as the gateway for medical innovation, not just in the United States, but the world." Paul Howard's no relation to me. This, again, is an independent doctor who makes a comment on a provision in an obscure bill that was introduced in Congress, and he says, perhaps the most important provision. Yet it only applies now to 1/3 of the drug area, and all we wanted to do was to apply it to the whole thing. Not including this independent assessment is a missed opportunity for Congress, for consumers, and patients to have a complete, independent, and objective look at FDA's management of its mission and resources with respect to drugs. I understand that some of my colleagues are concerned about over-reporting, but I would come back to the basic point that you don't know what you don't measure. This is about how Congress and the FDA prioritize. And given what's at stake, not including targeted reporting requirements that will help FDA to better achieve their mission on behalf of patients, is a huge, huge missed opportunity. Why? Speed over policy. I'd also like to talk about a key provision in the Senate's upstream supply chain provisions. It's not included in the final bill. As many of my colleagues know, the globalization of the drug supply chain presents unique challenges in ensuring the safety of the drugs America's patients receive. Quite a bit of time has understandably been devoted to this issue. Unfortunately, while the bill includes many bipartisan provisions that will help FDA to better target inspections of drug facilities based on risk, the final bill falls short in addressing end-to-end supply chain security. You know, that's sort of important. I think the American people sort of take for granted that we've got that in place now. In addition to not including bipartisan downstream provisions, the final bill does not include the Senate's bipartisan provision to accreditate third-party auditors to conduct drug safety audits of drug establishments. To be clear, these third-party drug safety audits would not have replaced official FDA inspections, but they would have been an important risk-based tool for the FDA to leverage in taking steps to ensure a safer global prescription drug supply chain. I actually believe that America thinks we've got that in place right now. Who could be opposed to such a common sense solution? It was a bipartisan initiative. Was it the House that kicked it out? Was it the FDA that kicked it out? It really doesn't matter. This was smart to have in the bill. The only conclusion I can come to is speed trumps policy. That our quest to get this done quickly meant that we didn't look closely enough at the things that we should have done and could have done, and we didn't do. Now, the ranking member talked about my disappointment and his disappointment on the downstream drug distribution security. I just want to take a brief moment and comment on downstream. I want to thank Senator Bennett. Other side of the aisle. We worked together, and because of his hard work and dedication to this issue, I think I can say that we're both disappointed that the final bill does not include bipartisan provisions that we've been working on together for the past few months. My colleagues all know why this is an important issue. It's important for America's patients and consumers. I remain committed to establishing a workable and reasonable traceability system that strengthens the integrity of the pharmaceutical distribution supply chain. It's critical that we replace the current patchwork of inconsistent, inefficient, and costly state laws with a predictable, workable, and appropriate federal standard. I'm committed to get this done. As I said to the ranking member and the chair, it's not going to be easy. We knew that when we took this on. You can't do it fast. I didn't know we had a stopwatch on how quickly we could get this bill through the Senate and how quickly we could get through conference and how quickly we could get it passed. I remind my colleagues, the current user fee agreement doesn't expire until later this year. It didn't have to be done now. But it was. And for now 45 minutes, I've pointed out things we could have done, should have done, and didn't do. And it's embarrassing. This could have been done. This was the right vehicle to put this in because it was a must-pass piece of legislation. Now let me, if I could, talk about some of the provisions that Senator Coburn and I introduced in the Patients FDA Act. I'm pleased that we were able to find a bipartisan path forward on some of these provisions, which will put in place an unprecedented level of transparency and accountability at the FDA. While FDA should have already done many of the things that will now be explicitly required of them, by ensuring we hold FDA accountable to measures and reports on specific requirements, there's a greater chance that they're going to actually get done. There's no certainty without congressional oversight. Greater transparency and accountability provisions included in the package today will help to ensure greater regulatory certainty and timely decisions on behalf of America's patients, which is key to ensuring America maintains its role as the world leader in medical innovation and our patients have access to the most cutting-edge therapies in a timely as possible fashion. FDA will be required to develop a regulatory science strategy and implementation plan with clear priorities and report on the progress made in achieving these priorities in fiscal year 2014 and fiscal year 2016. The current FDA commissioner has acknowledged that the FDA is relying on 20th century regulatory science to evaluate 21st century medical products. Let me read that again. The current FDA commissioner has acknowledged that the FDA is relying on 20th century regulatory science to evaluate 21st century medical products. Let's stop. Let's get this right. Even the commissioner of the FDA is saying, you know what, we're not even in the same century in how we do what we're trying to accomplish. In other words, the products that the FDA is required to regulate are advancing faster than the agency's ability to regulate them. I'll be honest, that's a big problem. Former FDA Commissioner von Eschenbach was right when he said that the FDA must be capable of ensuring that its reviewers know just as much about advances in emerging sciences as the creators of the products they regulate. Listen, I'll be the first to say that at the Food and Drug Administration, we've got some of the best and the brightest. They are some of the most dedicated federal workers. They're some of the smartest folks I've ever seen. But they process approvals. They're not on a bench doing research and development. They don't understand how medicine and science has changed since they left the bench themselves. There's every reason to believe that people should be required to go back and be innovators and not necessarily make a lifetime of work as a reviewer at the FDA. There's been much talk about regulatory science, but it's hard to tell if these efforts are targeted and achieving the desired results of helping the FDA to apply the most cutting-edge scientific tools in their research and their review of medical products. The agency must have clearly defined goals and metrics against which their progress will be tracked. This is the only way to ensure that the advances in regulatory science are being applied and FDA is prepared to regulate the most novel and cutting-edge medical products ever created. GAO has well documented FDA's management challenges. The user fee agreement included in the final bill will further increase these challenges by adding more than 1,200 new FDA FTEs or employees and further growing the scope of the agency's mission and regulatory responsibilities. Many of the concerns about the lack of predictability and uncertainty at the FDA are symptoms of unaddressed systemic management issues. This is the agency that controls they regulate 25 cents of every dollar of our economy. A February 2010 GAO report found that the FDA does not fully use established practices for effective strategic planning and management. FDA agreed with the GAO recommendation to take several actions to improve FDA's strategic planning and management, such as development of a strategic management plan and working to make FDA's performance measures more results-oriented. I can't think of a business in America that doesn't do that today. However, 2.5 years later, FDA has failed to adopt many of the key recommendations. To address this concern, the final bill requires the FDA to submit to Congress a strategic integrated management plan with specific accountability metrics as recommended by the GAO. Even though the FDA admitted to the GAO, based upon their recommendations, that they needed to do this and that they would do it, 2.5 years later, we're now putting it in statute in the user fee bill. GAO has well documented FDA's challenges to sufficiently and successfully utilize its information technology process. GAO has also noted how these challenges undermine FDA's ability to use accurate and timely information to augment its regulatory mission. GAO reports in 2009 and 2012 found that the FDA has made mixed progress in establishing the IT management capabilities essential to supporting the FDA's mission. That's the information technology. So, an agency that's on the cutting edge of medical approval in this country in 2009, 2012 was found to have made mixed progress in establishing the management capabilities essential through technology to complete their mission. A comprehensive IT strategy plan is vital for guiding and helping to coordinate the FDA's IT activities. A comprehensive IT strategy plan, including results-oriented goals and performance measures, is vital for guiding and helping to coordinate the FDA's IT activities, especially since the user fee agreement includes specific IT goals. The final bill requires the FDA to report on their progress in developing and implementing the comprehensive IT package called for by the GAO. To ensure further congressional oversight, GAO will report on the progress FDA makes on meeting the results-oriented goals and performance measures set out in their IT plan they submit to Congress. Enhanced reporting requirements with respect to biosimilars and generic drugs include key reporting on clearing the backlog of generic applications, will also provide important transparency into FDA's work and serve as an early warning indicator if the agreements are not being fulfilled. I'm also pleased that we were able to find a path forward on important pro-patient provisions from the Patients FDA Act, and provisions that will also reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens for innovators. I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Mikulski, Alexander, and Hagan, for work with us to ensure that the unnecessary red tape does not get in the way of meeting patients' unique medical device needs. The custom device provision in the bill provides an important path forward to ensure doctors are able to meet patients' most unique medical device needs in as timely manner as possible. The risk-benefit framework included in the user fee agreement and codified by the final bill will facilitate the balanced consideration of benefits and the risk of FDA's drug decision-making. As innovators have increasingly turned to global markets and opportunities overseas, FDA's work with its global peer regulators has taken on an even greater significance. FDA's work with its global regulatory counterparts to encourage uniform clinical trial standards will optimize global clinical trials to ensure the need to conduct duplicative clinical trials is minimized, while FDA maintaining the gold standard for approval. Well, I want to thank Senator Paul. I want to thank Senator Paul for working with me to ensure that we have optimized global clinical trial work and FDA's work with global peer regulators as much as possible to reduce unnecessary regulatory hurdles. Senator Paul was a champion in the committee to say, why don't we accept the data that we get from trials in Europe for applications that are under review for approval in the United States? And the answer I gave him was in 1997 when we wrote the Food and Drug Cosmetic Modernization Bill, we gave FDA the authority to do that. And now some 15 years later, it has never, ever, ever been used. As a matter of fact, the FDA won't even consult with a company that says, tell us how we need to design our trial in Europe so you will accept our data. Hadn't happened. But you know what? It's got to happen in the future if we want drugs to be cost-effective so that people can afford them. If we want innovation to happen here as well as over there. If innovation in the place where it's ultimately approved is determined by whether you can recover the cost of your investment, I will assure you we're all going to shop somewhere else for our drugs, our devices, our biologics, and even our generics. It won't be here unless we learn how to share that data from continent to continent. I want to highlight some specific medical device regulatory improvements. There may be any number of reasons a sponsor wants to conduct certain clinical studies that are not directly related to the classification or approval of medical devices by the FDA. However, some sponsors have noted the tendency of the FDA to effectively prejudge the approval of a medical device by basing its decision related to a request to conduct clinical investigations of a device on whether or not the FDA believes the clinical study will be adequate to support the ultimate classification or approval of a device. If the FDA approves the investigational use of a device only using the more narrow regulatory standard of device approval or classification, clinical research in the United States could be unduly restricted. The final bill would return the investigational device exemption approval process to the standard authorized by the statute, which is a good thing for both patients and for innovators. The final bill will also improve regulatory certainty, transparency, and accountability with respect to medical devices by requiring FDA to provide a substantive summary of the scientific or regulatory rationale for significant decisions. As many of my colleagues know, Section 510K of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requires device manufacturers to notify FDA of their intent to market a medical device at least 90 days in advance. Medical device manufacturers are required to submit a pre-market notification if they intend to introduce a device into commercial distribution for the first time or reintroduce a device that will be significantly changed or modified to the extent that its safety or effectiveness could be affected. Such change or modification could relate to the design, material, chemical composition, energy source, or manufacturing process. There are legitimate concerns about recent guidance issued by the FDA that could significantly increase the regulatory burden related to the 510K modifications without clear benefit to patients. The final bill will go a long way in restoring the regulatory certainty and balance with respect to 510 modification process by making it clear that the 1997 guidance remains the standard until FDA issues new guidance with appropriate input from stakeholders on that subject. While I wish that we could have gone further to strengthen and improve the device third-party review and inspection program, the final bill does reauthorize these programs and includes a provision from the Patients FDA Act to set forth a process for reaccreditation and reauthorization of third-party reviewers. Another thing that we placed in the 1997 Act in hopes that we would see academia in America actually be approved as third-party evaluators, not for heart stents or that class of device, but how about things like Band-Aids? How about those things that we shouldn't waste an FDA or reviewer's time on? Couldn't they contract, the company contract with an academic institution to evaluate and reapprove, reaccredit? FDA has chosen to do that in-house. Well, this is the first and important step to enhancing the third-party review program. Affirming the least burdensome requirement, I also appreciate the final bill underscores the importance of the least burdensome provision requirement we put into the 1997 law in FDAMA. It streamlined the regulatory process and reduced burdens to improve patient access to medical devices. A central purpose of the FDA Modernization Act of 1997, or FDAMA as I like to call it, was to ensure the timely availability of safe, effective new products that will benefit the public and that our nation continues to lead the world in new product innovation and development. The goal was to streamline the regulatory process and reduce burden to improve patient access to breakthrough technologies. This law required FDA to eliminate unnecessary burdens that may delay the marketing of beneficial new products, but the statutory requirements for clearance and approval remain the same. The section of the statute that captures these provisions are commonly referred to as least burdensome. For years, FDA included least burdensome language in the guidance documents and letters, yet towards the end of 2009, the least burdensome language disappeared only to reappear after Congress expressed significant concern regarding the FDA's failure to consistently apply these requirements in its work with devices. The lack of consistent applications of the least burdensome requirements has added to the regulatory uncertainty and unnecessary regulatory burden in a manner completely inconsistent with the law. It is said that Congress needs to reaffirm the provision that's been in law since 1997, but I want to thank Senator Klobuchar and Senator Bennett for working with me to underscore the importance of affirming the least burdensome requirement in this final bill. The final bill restores a more appropriate balance to FDA's conflicts of interest rules. This is an issue in which many patient groups have weighed and many members have worked because of its importance to patients and ultimately overall confidence in the FDA advisory committees. Ensuring that the FDA has access to the most qualified experts is vital to ensuring that FDA's scientific capabilities and the confidence in its regulatory decisions. It is critical that patients have the benefit of the very best expertise when weighing decisions that impact patient access to life-saving products. Unfortunately, since 2007, increasingly complex and restrictive conflicts of interest rules have often resulted in the agency being able to consult with leading experts and difficulty in filling key advisory committee positions. These challenges are compromising the quality and the timeliness of the FDA decision-making. The final bill should help to address these concerns and ensure that the FDA can draw upon the most knowledgeable experts. Lastly, I'd like to highlight the Advancing Breakthrough Therapies for Patients Act. Bipartisan legislation, I was pleased to join Senator Bennett, Senator Hatch, in supporting because it will ensure patients have access to targeted, life-saving therapies as efficiently as possible. As former FDA Commissioner Von Eschenbach has rightly said, breakthrough technologies deserve a breakthrough in the way the FDA evaluates them. This legislation is supported by Friends of Cancer Research and National Venture Capital Association. Early this year, an op-ed penned by former Commissioner Mark McClellan and Ellen Siegel of Friends of Cancer Research noted how the sequencing of the human genome has helped to unlock an even greater understanding of disease at the molecule level, helping to make personalized medicine become a reality. They noted two main goals of the breakthrough legislation. First, to reduce the total development time and cost of the most promising breakthroughs. And second, to minimize the number of patients that would be given a controlled regime or a currently available treatment that doesn't work well. They're right to underscore that in order to fulfill the promise of breakthrough therapies in this legislation, the regulators at FDA must fully engage, working with sponsors early in the development and review process once a product has received the breakthrough designation. More than 45 organizations representing patients, advocates, physicians, caregivers, consumers, and researchers have weighed into Congress urging the Advancing Breakthrough Therapies for Patients Act to be included in the final user fee package because they recognize that employing such an all-hands-on-deck approach at FDA for these therapies will ultimately result in the most efficient development program and help to ensure that the most promising new treatments reach patients as safely and effectively as possible. Many would argue that modernization of the acceleration process and fast-track pathways have been a long time coming since Congress has not significantly updated either pathway since 1997. Earlier this year, Dr. Paul Howard, in writing about breakthrough legislation, noted, and I quote, "The most important section of the legislation may be the clause that requires the Secretary of HHS to commission an independent entity to assess the quality, efficacy, and predictability of how FDA has applied the directives in this legislation no later than 4 years after the bill passes." He goes on to say, and I quote, that may be the best way to ensure that we won't wait another 15 to 20 years to understand how well the FDA is utilizing the authority granted to it by Congress. Unfortunately, this independent assessment did not make it in the final bill. Speed trumps policy. In summation, FDA faces an unprecedented challenge today, challenges that we couldn't have envisioned a generation ago, yet FDA still regulates a decade ago based upon the Commissioner. The agreement, many of the provisions in the final bill are intended to help address these challenges. Unfortunately, the final bill does not bring to bear all of the tools that could have been included to ensure the greatest certainty, transparency, and accountability for patients and taxpayers. This is a missed opportunity. I ask my colleagues, where will we be if provisions enacted as part of this bill, like the breakthrough therapy provision, do not achieve their stated purpose? Where will we be if Congress does not do our part to ensure accountability on the part of the agency by carrying out consistent congressional oversight? Where will America's patients be in 5 years? Will FDA's regulatory standard be the global gold standard? Will America lead the world in innovation? Will the world's leading drug and device innovators choose to innovate in America or continue the disturbing trend of exporting great innovation and good jobs overseas in continued face of regulatory uncertainty? There are good provisions in this final bill, but more work remains to be done. America's patients and innovators are counting on Congress to conduct the proper oversight in the months and years ahead to ensure that these user fee agreements, authorities, and new responsibilities are implemented and fulfilled consistent with the law. They are also counting on Congress to complete the unfinished business of doing all we can do to ensure that the FDA fulfills its mission on behalf of America's patients and our nation's global leadership in medical innovation is restored. I commit to my colleagues, constituents, and the FDA. I intend to complete the unfinished business before us today in either future legislation or in committee action. Mr. President, you have been patient and observant. I thank you for that. At this time, I will yield the floor. I see my colleague here, and at his conclusion, I will pick back up with the 2.5 additional hours that I have reserved.
The senator from Kentucky.
President, I'm not a big fan of foreign aid. We have a lot